just for record, I'm 1 year younger than him. So if I should retire, maybe he should also.
Well, I am retired.
Let me say that it's a pleasure for me to speak to this group. And the theme of this session is supposed to be on the whole move towards sustainability and how it impacts on the global south. If I were to cover the full range of issues that this requires, it would take a very long time. I would say that essentially the challenge of reconciling growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection has probably got three key areas where substantial change will be required. One is in the whole area of land and water use, particularly in rural areas. The second is in the patterns of urbanization. And the third is in our energy economy. I'm not going to try and even cover all of these three, but I'm going to focus largely, in fact, almost entirely, on what I think is the most critical challenge for sustainability over this century, and that's going to be how the energy economy of the world will get transformed over the next 40, 50 years. And that's what I'm going to focus on. Let me here come up front and say that in some ways my theme echoes what Maurice Strong also said. It's partly because of, now I've been working in India for about 7, 8 years, and I see the different mood there, where in a sense what we are doing is coming out of a certain victim mentality into something which says, well, maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to redress some of the things which were wrong in the past. So my theme is really going to be the sense in which the emerging transformation of the energy economy of the world poses not just constraints for the global south, but also possible opportunities. Right now, we know that our sort of representatives are meeting in Durban, where they'll be tackling the whole challenge of climate change. I'm not going to say much on that. Perhaps later, towards the end, I will. In fact, the focus that I want to give on energy policy is more from the point of view of development. And if I look at it from the perspective of development, what is the challenge that I see for a country like India, for a country like China? Let me say incidentally straight away that all my remarks are essentially addressed in the context of developing countries which are energy poor. It would not apply necessarily to the energy-rich countries, the energy surplus countries. But the vast majority of the developing countries are energy poor, net importers of energy. And only a small number are essentially energy surplus and exporters of energy. The challenge for any development planner comes from two things. One, if we look at the world today, at least 2/3 of the people in the world need more energy and substantially more energy if they are to get out of poverty. We cannot escape that fact. Energy access has to go up. Energy consumption has to go up in the developing world. There is otherwise you cannot expect to have the sort of productivity transformations which are necessary in order for people to get out of poverty. Second, we live in an energy economy which is almost completely fossil fuel based. About 80% of the world's primary energy supply comes from fossil fuels. We know that the challenge there, there are many challenges there. One challenge is the environmental challenge, the fact that many of our local, regional, and global environmental problems are linked to fossil fuel use. It isn't just the issue of carbon and climate. It's also regional pollution issues, acid rain, black carbon. There are also local pollution issues, in fact, much more substantial local pollution issues in terms of the quality of air in urban areas in the developing world. So I have to have made substantial increases in energy. I live in an energy economy which is largely fossil fuel based, and the dilemma is in reconciling these two things. This is a great challenge. I want to focus my remarks, therefore, on the whole role. What is the role that, what can developing countries do in this context? And let's just face certain realities. If you take energy security, the reality today is that the cheaper fossil fuel energy sources have been used up, or they're not things over which the energy poor developing countries would have ready access. Yes, the Indias, the Chinas, and others are hunting for concessions, but they're basically getting, if you like, the second-order concessions, not the big ones. So the option of having access to cheap fossil fuels is just not there for any developing country. There are other broader issues about this also. People talk in terms of peak oil, the fact that it is possible that the world's availability of oil may start showing significant sort of constraints. People talk in terms of this peak arising pretty soon. But the bottom line for any planner in a developing country, which is energy poor, is he cannot plan the energy economy of his country on the assumption of cheap fuel. In fact, today you would have to assume rising costs of fuel. Let me give some sense of where. And particularly those of us who come from Asia are very conscious of this. If I take a region that I call Monsoon Asia, the word Asia actually has no real cultural meaning. I don't think there's a single Asian language which has an indigenous word for Asia. It is not a concept which is there in people's minds. And it's a highly diverse thing. It just happens to be something arbitrarily drawn on a map which geographers call Asia. The part that I think I focus attention on often is what I call Monsoon Asia. This has a certain coherence and a certain unity. It's almost complete. It is significantly energy poor. It is a very fast-growing part of the world, and it has a very large part, probably nearly half the world's population lives in what I call Monsoon Asia, which is Asia east of Afghanistan, south of Mongolia. And the reason I call it Monsoon Asia is all of these countries are basically subject to the great monsoon winds which bring rain to them. And they have certain other uniformities which I'm not going to go into. But if I look at numbers, and if I look at projections of energy, 40% of the world's increase in oil consumption is expected to take place in Monsoon Asia. 40% over the next, say, 3 decades. They are, in terms of the increase in oil demand, is going to come from Monsoon Asia. If I look at the supply side sources, on the other hand, roughly speaking, the projections suggest that a quarter of the increase will come from what people in this part of the world call Middle East, what we prefer to call West Asia, because it isn't, that part of the world is not east of us, it's west of us. So we call it, Monsoon Asia would happily refer to it as West Asia. About 25% from West Asia, about 25% from the, if you like, the Caspian region and Africa, about 25% from unconventional sources like shale oil, and about 25% from other places. This is roughly the pattern of how the increase will come. If I look at the way the world oil economy is evolving, what I see is that the countries like the United States are rapidly reducing the dependence on West Asian oil and increasing their offtake of oil from other parts of the world, but most particularly in the case of the United States, unconventional oil, shale oil, is like, or oil from new sources like Alaska. There's a talk again of opening up Alaska for oil. If you see Europe, it's really the Caspian and Russia, where much of the oil will come from. What I'm stressing is that in some ways what one sees evolving is monsoon Asia's huge dependence, growing dependence on West Asian oil. Almost all of the increase in West Asian oil will essentially have to go to Asia, and this has certain implications for energy security, which they have to factor in. Coal, yes, India and China have large coal deposits, but already in terms of the way they have projected their energy economy, they are becoming net importers of coal. If you look at projections, by 2030, the additional demands just from these two countries will require an additional 1 million tons a day of coal to be shipped from somewhere. There are only a limited number of places which could do this. It could be Australia, it could be Indonesia, it could be South Africa, but a very limited number of places that it could come from. Whatever it be, may well be available, but it's not going to be cheap coal. So the bottom line is that if you are concerned about energy security, if you continue with your present fossil fuel-based economy, then accept the fact that you will have to depend for your supplies on more and more on distant places, more and more on places where there may be issues of supply stability, and certainly you will have to pay more and more for both the oil and the coal.